44-year-old Stephen Downs has been charged with sexual assault and the murder of 20-year-old Sophie Sergey. Sergey was stabbed multiple times, shot in the head, and found dead inside a dorm bathtub at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks.
On April 26, 1993, the bustling in Bartlett Hall suddenly came to a halt as a janitor came out of the all-women bathroom screaming. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Unfortunately, it was the bloody body of 20-year-old Sophie Sergey. It would take almost 30 years to find her killer. Welcome back to Mysterious 7, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases from across the globe. I'm Corey, and today we will discuss a 29-year-old cold case finally solved in 2022. Without any further ado, let's dive into it. Sophie Sergey grew up in the native village of Pitkas Point, Alaska. At that time, it had less than 100 inhabitants. Standing only 4 feet 9 inches tall, Sophie was a small girl with big dreams. While she initially wanted to join the U.S. Navy, her height would prove challenging in that field, and she instead decided to pursue a career in marine biology. Sophie worked hard to become the first person in her family to attend college. In 1990, Sophie was awarded a full scholarship to the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. Although attending the large school, which had 100 times more students than her home village, was a huge challenge, Sophie seemed to be doing quite well at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. She was keeping up with her studies, making friends, and staying out of trouble. Things seemed to be going quite well for Sophie up until 1992. It was then that she was told that she needed corrective jaw surgery to fix her severe overbite. Unfortunately, this was an expensive procedure, and Sophie and her family could not afford it. This meant that Sophie would need to take a leave of absence from school in order to work. She found a job as a teaching assistant back at Pitkas Point, but still, it wasn't enough. She also got a second job as a clerk. Although Sophie was working in Pitkas, her surgical procedure and follow-up would take place in Fairbanks. Pitkas Point is about 525 miles from Fairbanks. Sophie had to take a 5.5-hour flight from her home down to Fairbanks every time she had an appointment with the orthodontist. April 26, 1993, was another appointment day for Sophie. She left Pitkas on April 24th because she wanted to spend some extra time with her friend, Shirley. Shirley was also a student of UAF. Sophie would stay with Shirley in her single-occupancy room on the second floor in Bartlett Hall while she was in town. The two were very good friends who cherished quality time with each other. As soon as Sophie landed in Fairbanks, the two met up in the dorm and had lunch together. The next day, Sophie saw a movie with some other friends while Shirley was preparing for her finals. After the day's activities, the two met up in Shirley's room, along with Shirley's boyfriend, Noah. Noah ordered some pizza, and they all sat around eating, catching up, and watching the TV in Shirley's room. Usually, Shirley would sleep in her boyfriend's room whenever Sophie was in town for her appointments, and that night was no different. Before Shirley and Noah left, Sophie mentioned that she wanted to have a smoke outside the hall. By then, it was late, and it was also bitterly cold outside. Shirley suggested that she go into the shared bathroom on the second floor to have her cigarette in the tub room. The tub room was a rarely used separate room within the bathroom, which had only a single bathtub in it. It also had a vent that led outside that she could blow the smoke into. Thinking this would be much warmer and safer, Sophie left the room, heading down the hall, straight to the bathroom to have a cigarette. Soon, Shirley and her boyfriend were ready to leave. She wrote a note for Sophie and pinned it to her door that she left unlocked. The next day, April 26th, when Shirley returned from Noah's room, she noted a couple of odd things. The note that she had left for Sophie the night before was still pinned to the door. Additionally, her room looked oddly the same as she had left it the previous night, as if no one had slept there. She felt it was strange, but still didn't think anything serious had happened. She figured that Sophie had awoken early, put everything back in place, and had gone to the bathroom to get ready. Shirley then went to the bathroom. When she called out for Sophie, she thought she heard a voice say, "Yeah, I'm here," from one of the stalls. She took a shower and returned to her room where she left another note for Sophie. She then went on with her day. While Shirley was busy with her day's work, she waited for Sophie to get in touch, but she never did. Shirley thought that maybe Sophie's treatment was taking longer than expected, so she called the orthodontist's office. Her heart skipped a beat when she was told that Sophie never showed up for her appointment. Sophie had also missed her flight back to Pitcairn Point. At approximately 3 p.m. on the same day, a janitor was seen running out of the bathroom. Frightened and speechless, she grabbed a student by her hand and took her to the bathroom to show her what she had seen. The expression on both of their faces was clear. Whatever gruesome sight that they saw would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Inside was the body of a woman who had been brutally murdered. They called the police, and soon officers and reporters were swarming Bartlett Hall. The news began to spread like a wildfire through the campus. A disturbed Shirley had heard that a body was found in the bathroom on her floor. She dropped everything and headed straight to the hall with Noah. The supposed crime scene was already secured, and no one was allowed to go up to the second floor. As soon as Shirley mentioned that she was looking for her friend, it got the officers' attention. They allowed her in with Noah and started to question them about their missing friend. The officers followed Noah and Shirley to the room where they last saw Sophie, and while the officers were searching the room, they noticed Sophie's ID card. It was then that they realized that the body that had been discovered was that of Sophie Sergey. Since the murder supposedly happened in the tub room, the case didn't seem like one that would be difficult to solve. As mentioned before, the tub room is a small room within the bathroom that students don't generally use. But the bathrooms were always busy, so someone could have at least seen or heard something strange. The officers spent hours interviewing everyone living in Bartlett Hall, especially those that lived on the second floor. Surprisingly, no one heard or saw anything related to the murder. From the crime scene, the police gathered evidence like hair, fiber, semen, and DNA. That should have been enough to pick out the criminal, but the technology at the time was limited. This case was proving to be a lot harder to crack than it was initially thought. It was difficult for the officers to focus on a particular target group because the hall was open to anyone to go in and out. To further complicate the issue, dorm residents regularly swapped rooms with one another and also allowed non-residents to stay in their rooms. Investigators questioned Sophie's friends about her love life, but found out she didn't have a boyfriend. Authorities didn't have many leads to chase, but it was believed that the suspect was likely a student of UAF. Investigator Jim McCann said in a released statement that he believed the suspect was a student that had returned home after the end of the semester. He then urged the public to cooperate with the police by observing the behaviors of returning UAF students around them. He also said that he believed the criminal was a psychopath who took out his anger on women and would probably do it again. But aside from these beliefs, there was not a lot to go on. A reward of $20,000 was offered for any useful information that could lead to a break in the case, but it was never claimed. Over the following 24 years, the case went cold. In 2007, Sophie Sergey's case was reopened. The Alaska State Troopers' Cold Unit began re-examining the evidence at the crime scene and interviewing available witnesses all over again. Because a gun was involved, they believed that someone should have at least heard a noise. Since everyone claimed they heard nothing, the officers believed that Sophie may have been murdered at a different location and had her body moved to the tub room where it was discovered. Looking at the case from a new angle, the officers needed to call in everyone that lived in Bartlett Hall in 1993. Unfortunately, a lot changes in 14 years. People move on, memories fade, evidence deteriorates. Yet, on the other hand, technology only improves with time. In 2015, due to budgetary falls, the state of Alaska had to cut its spending, so the unit was dismantled. The shutdown didn't leave only Sophie's case cold, but many other cold cases in Alaska. It was difficult for the investigators to inform the victims' families that they would no longer be working on their cases. For 22 years, Sophie's mother had waited to find out who murdered her daughter. Now, she felt her last shred of hope had been lost, since the cold case unit was shut down. However, the cold cases were not abandoned. Instead, they were assigned to active investigators who were at the same time busy working on new cases. The cases may have remained open, but no one was actively investigating them. There just weren't enough resources. Years passed, but still investigators never gave up on the case. According to court documents back in 2010, police learned that a student of UAF, Nicholas Dazer, who was a security guard at the school, was fired because he possessed a firearm back in 1993. He denied ever possessing the type of gun that killed Sophie, but said his roommate, Steve Downs, had an H&R model .22 caliber revolver at the time. Unfortunately, the lead pretty much came to a dead end, with no further evidence able to be obtained. After Sophie's death, nothing could be done with the DNA found on her body because the technology at the time was limited. In 2000, the technology had advanced and the officers were able to discover that the suspect was a male. A DNA profile was built and uploaded to the FBI's CODES, but it didn't match anyone in the criminal database, which meant the suspect had never been arrested by the police. Years passed and technology evolved even further, yet still, it had not progressed enough to the point that it would lead investigators to the suspect's door. But in 2018, advances in genetic DNA research proved effective in solving cold cases. After genetic genealogy technology led to the Golden State Killer's arrest, the Alaska troopers believed it would help them with Sophie's case. The officers sent the suspect's DNA to the same laboratory that analyzed the notorious killer's DNA, and on December 18, 2018, they got a result. The DNA matched a female relative of Steve Downs, one of the UAF students that had been interviewed back in 1993. The same man who was named by Nicholas Dazer in 2010. Police quickly made their way to Steve Downs' apartment with a warrant for his DNA. They questioned Steve again about Sophie's murder. He said he remembered Sophie through her pictures. Back in 1993, when he was interviewed, he denied having any involvement in the case. He claimed he spent the whole night with his girlfriend, the night Sophie was killed. After Steve's DNA was tested, it matched the profile found at the crime scene. Finally, on February 15, 2019, Steve Downs was arrested at his home in Maine. Even though the truth had been revealed through his DNA, Steve continued to deny his involvement in the case. According to prosecutors, Steve Downs showed no remorse after he was arrested. 3 years after his arrest, Steve's trial began in January of 2022. Prosecutors called on a number of witnesses, most of whom were UAF students back in 1993, to tell the court what they noticed back then. One witness, Vanessa Allen, a first-year student at UAF back in 1993, said she found it strange that the tub's light was on and the door was closed. It was strange because no one ever used the tub. She also said she heard noises that sounded like firecrackers through the wall next to the tub. Jennifer Roy, a graduating student at the time, also testified. Roy said she was still awake at the time Sophie was murdered. She wanted to keep herself awake to study for her final exam in the morning, so she decided to take a shower around 1:30 a.m. According to Roy, she heard someone come into the bathroom and enter the tub room. Later, she heard a loud thud against the wall. She said murmurings were coming from that tub room, which made her believe that there was more than one person in there. When Roy came back to the dorm after she had finished her exam, she saw the janitor run out of the bathroom. She had been the student that the janitor grabbed and took to see Sophie's body in the tub room. Different witnesses gave their accounts of the day Sophie was murdered, which the judge noted. Among them was Nicholas Dazer, Steve's roommate and best friend. The two were very close during their days as students at UAF, and even after they graduated. Unfortunately, Nicholas had to take the stand against his old friend. He said he never thought there was any connection between Steve and Sophie's murder. He described Steve as a popular person who socialized well with others. According to Nicholas, Steve was his groomsman when he got married in 1998. He never would have imagined that his friend had committed the disturbing crime back then. Steve's then-girlfriend, now Catherine Lee, also testified in court. She said Steve had been in and out of her room on the night of the murder. She also said she knew Steve had a gun that she thought he had borrowed. Before the sentencing, Steve's attorney, James Hawinick, told the judge that Steve was not a monster. He brought up the fact that he had no criminal background aside from the assault and murder of Sophie. He was also concerned about Steve's health, considering Steve was 400 pounds and had high blood pressure at the time of sentencing. He also expressed Steve's wishes to get a lesser sentence that would allow him to go home to hug his parents soon. Judge Thomas Temple responded by saying since Steve murdered Sophie, she hasn't been able to hug anyone, and no one would ever be able to hug her. Finally, in September 2022, Steve was sentenced to 75 years in prison for the horrific crimes he committed all those years earlier. He was given 67 years for the murder of Sophie Sergey, with a minimum of 20 years and a maximum of 99 years. Additionally, he was given a mandatory 8 years for sexual assault. Steve will not have a parole opportunity until after he has served 1/3 or 25 years of his sentence. Steve would be 70 years old at that time. According to reports, Sophie's family didn't speak at the hearing, nor did Steve's family. But Sophie's brother, Alexei, told reporters how much his sister's death had affected the whole family over the years. Their mom, who had waited for years to see her daughter's murderer brought to justice, had passed away in 2021 after Steve had been arrested. Though many questions still remain, such as the motive for such a brutal killing, at least there is some solace in the fact that he is now being punished and cannot hurt anyone else. What do you think about this case? Do you think justice was served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Stay safe, friends. Until next time.